Before the Congo rose, before freedom had a name, one child opened his eyes.
In the heart of Central Africa, before the Congo made headlines, before revolution became a whisper in the ears of the oppressed, a child opened his eyes to a world already set against him. On July 2, 1925, under the glare of the Belgian colonial flag, Patrice Émery Lumumba was born in a quiet village in Kasai Province. His parents, humble farmers, lived off the land but never owned it. They lived under orders, bowed to foreign rule, and carried their dreams in silence. But their son would not remain silent for long. Belgium called it a civilizing mission, a gift of modernity, but in truth, it was a grip of steel. Beneath the surface of colonial promises were chains, real and invisible. Forced labor, high taxes with no returns, beatings for minor disobedience, and deep-seated racism marked daily life. Children watched their parents stripped of dignity, and women carried burdens heavier than their years. The Belgian flag didn't fly to inspire, it hovered like a shadow. Lumumba was born into this shadow. But unlike many around him, he asked questions from an early age. Why were his people made to serve in their own land? Why did schools teach only European greatness while African history was erased? He was Batetela, a smaller ethnic group in a country of many tribes, and that placed him on the fringe, outside the power structures of both the Belgians and the tribal aristocracies of Katanga and other regions. That position, though marginal, gave him a unique eye. He didn't see Congo as a kingdom of competing tribes. He saw a people crying with the same voice, even if they used different tongues. At a local mission school run by Catholic missionaries, Lumumba encountered more than books. He encountered contradictions. He was taught French, not just as a language, but as a weapon of culture, as a gatekeeper to the world of the powerful. He read the writings of French philosophers. The words liberty, equality, and fraternity were written across the classroom walls, even as black boys were beaten for asking questions. But he read everything he could. What the colonizers gave as crumbs, he turned into fuel. And while many Congolese saw education as a path to comfort within the system, Lumumba used it to sharpen his rebellion. He read Voltaire, Hugo, Rousseau, not to imitate the French, but to expose their hypocrisy. In secret, he wrote poems and articles that questioned the entire foundation of colonialism. He was no ordinary student. His curiosity was fire. His words, small sparks waiting for the right wind. As he entered adulthood, Lumumba moved to the capital, Leopoldville, today's Kinshasa. He became a postal clerk, a job seen as respectable but low tier. But it gave him access to something rare: information. Through letters, pamphlets, and conversations with other educated Congolese, known as évolués, he connected with a rising network of thinkers, rebels, and dreamers. These were men in suits who walked both worlds. They dined with Europeans during the day, but cried for Africa in private. Lumumba was different from them. Many évolués still sought compromise, hoping to become mayors, translators, or civil servants under Belgian approval. But Lumumba wanted something else. He wanted the Congo for Congolese, not a reform, not a share, freedom, total, complete, unapologetic. He began to speak publicly. At trade union meetings, at local gatherings, and on street corners. His speeches were sharp, poetic, and dangerous. He didn't stoke tribal hatred, he spoke of unity. He didn't preach vengeance, he preached justice. But every sentence carried the weight of revolution. He talked about national identity before Congo even had one. He called for independence long before the Belgians considered it, and his voice began to carry beyond city walls. By the early 1950s, he had become the Secretary General of the Postal Workers Union, using that platform not just for wages, but for liberation. He gave fiery radio broadcasts and wrote essays that made Belgian officials nervous. His growing influence wasn't lost on the authorities. They were used to docile evolués. But Lumumba wasn't one of them. He wasn't asking, he was declaring. In 1956, the hammer came down. He was arrested on charges of embezzlement, an accusation many believed was fabricated to silence him. He was sentenced to prison. But prison did not break him, it refined him. Cold nights, harsh food, no books, no stage. But Lumumba turned the silence into resolve. He left prison a different man, leaner, sharper, hungrier. He knew now that freedom would not be handed down. It would have to be fought for, not with bullets, but with vision. Congo needed leadership, real leadership. Not tribal warlords, not colonial puppets, but someone who could speak to every village, every language, every pain. And across Africa, the winds of change were rising. Ghana had just won independence. Sudan had broken its chains. Morocco and Tunisia had pushed France back. All around him, Africa was shaking off centuries of silence. Lumumba sensed the moment. He began to travel again, meeting with other African leaders, learning from their struggles and building alliances. He formed the Mouvement National Congolais, MNC, a political party that didn't speak the language of one tribe, but of a united Congo. His message was simple. Congo must be for Congolese, not for Belgians, not for compromise, and not for tribal kings who bowed to Brussels for favors. He began to draw massive crowds, poor villagers, students, workers, even some middle-class evolués began to listen. People walked for miles to hear him. He was electric, charismatic. Some called him arrogant, others called him dangerous. But no one could ignore him. The Belgians, watching from their fortresses, realized what they had helped create. Their schoolboy had become a storm. Their worker had become a warrior. They had fed him language, and he had turned it into a weapon. They had given him books, and he had used them to burn down the lies of the empire. In villages across Congo, mothers now whispered his name to their children. Lumumba. A name that carried hope and fear in equal measure. A name that made white officials hold emergency meetings in Brussels. A name that made chiefs reconsider their loyalties. A name that reminded everyone that Congo's days of silence were numbered. His opponents tried to dismiss him as a radical, a Marxist, a threat to stability. But what Lumumba wanted wasn't ideology, it was dignity. And that made him more dangerous than any gun. He spoke of an Africa for Africans. Not just Congo, but all of Africa. He warned that the colonial powers would try to delay freedom, that they would try to divide black people through tribe, religion, language, and fear. And he was right. The traps were already being set. But Lumumba had chosen his path. He would not kneel. Not to Belgium, not to fake independence, not even to death. He told his friends, "We are not fighting just for ourselves, but for our children, for the ones not yet born. We must show them that their lives belong to them." And so, the rebellion was no longer a secret. It was not in the shadows. It was marching in the open. The world began to watch. Congo was changing. A young man from a forgotten village had picked up the torch, and now, that torch was burning so brightly, it could not be ignored. This was the beginning. This was the root. This was Lumumba.
Stay tuned for episode 2, where the fire spreads and Congo steps into the storm.
This is the Unwritten Verdict.